Doctrinal Perspective, Lesson 1. We're going to look at one method of maintaining a balance in doctrine. Now, a lot of this I think will probably be new to you, even the concept or the idea, and so just go with it as we look at it, and don't try and get ahead of the lectures. And just as I explain it to you, I think it'll become quite clear to you what I'm trying to get across. Now, remember, this is just one method of maintaining balance in doctrine. The church, particularly at this time in history, has two major problems. One is the teaching of error, and the other the teaching of truth without balance. Let's look at error first of all. Once again, we looked at the introduction, we talked about error, and we want to look at this again. The teaching of error has arisen as a real problem in this century, or in the 20th century really, and now error is everywhere. Error has taken over, and it's arisen as a real problem in our time for two reasons. The first one is ignorance, accidental error, error that wasn't intended. Although the scriptures are available as never before, and people are more literate than ever before, supposedly anyway, there's a real ignorance of what the Bible actually teaches. And we need to be clear about this. Some of it's due to the proliferation of English versions and the consequent loss of belief in verbal inspiration. Because there's so many versions of the Bible, people don't really look at the Bible and say, well, these are the words that it says, because whatever version you use says probably different words to the others, and so there's a loss of belief in verbal inspiration, that God actually gave us the words of the scriptures. And so that's been a real problem. And so some of the problem is due to this. A lot of the problem is due to the fact that people don't actually read the Bible. Very, very few Christians can honestly say that they read the Bible every day. Very few Christians can honestly say that they've read the Bible from cover to cover. Very few Christians can honestly say that they sit down and study their Bibles regularly. And so, naturally, they don't even know what the Bible says most of the time. And then the lack of doctrinal teaching from our church pulpits is obvious to all and almost universally accepted as normal, right? And this is a major reason for the general ignorance of doctrine that pervades the established church. In many churches, almost no doctrine is taught at all, and there is arisen an often repeated mantra, something that people say. They say doctrine is divisive, so let's teach doctrine. And that's, they say let's avoid teaching doctrine at all costs in case we divide the church. Well, let's understand that there's a tremendous cost to this thinking, and we're paying that price now in that people don't know the doctrines. Right. The problem of ignorance goes deeper than this, however. The real problem is with the system. The Bible colleges and universities that produce the clergy of our day. The clergy are the direct product of the teaching they receive, and their lack of doctrinal teaching and insight are an indictment on their peers and lecturers. Our Bible colleges and universities are failing miserably to teach the doctrines, and in fact to teach God's word at all. And so many of the pastors and ministers and teachers that come out of our Bible colleges and universities don't themselves know the doctrines, and so they have no chance of teaching them. But that's not the only reason for there to be things to be in the mess that they're in. A lot of the problem is to do with money. People deliberately promoting error. We need to understand right from the start that religion is the biggest money-making business in our world today, and it always has been. Religion, not Christianity and not the truth, but religion and all the religions in the world are businesses. There are fabulous businesses that make billions and hundreds of billions of dollars, and religion has always been the biggest money-making business in the world, and it is today. The use of religion, not Christianity, but religion for financial gain has always been a cause for introducing error into Christianity. There is no real money in Christianity. We need to understand that. The money is in religion. At present, the various cults, the Roman Catholics, the JWs, SDA, Worldwide Church of God, the Mormons, the Moonies, and there are literally, in our day and age, hundreds of cults. And they're all gaining huge capital investments which would not be possible without their particular error to push. If they didn't have something to push that was different, an error to push, they wouldn't be distinctive and they wouldn't be able to get people to follow them, and they wouldn't be able to make the big money. Now you say, how are they rich? Well, they own land. The Roman Catholic Church is the biggest landowner in Australia, not in acreage, but in value of the land that they own and the buildings they own. And all the cults own capital, and this makes them rich and it makes them powerful. And then remember, in Australia, all churches are classed as charities, so they don't pay any income tax. So it's all profit. And so it's no wonder religion is such a profitable business. And not only organisations gain money by error, but also individuals such as authors, lecturers, pastors, evangelists, convention speakers, and it goes on and on and on and on. Now, let me hasten to add here that not all of these are in it just for the money, right? And the truth of the matter is that there are many pastors and teachers and evangelists who are genuine, who are not in it for the money, but many are in it for the money, particularly authors and lecturers, and we need to be very aware that this is so. And to make money from religion, it's necessary to be different from the traditional mainstream, and this is why deliberate error is introduced and a cult is formed. If you just preach what everybody else preaches, you're not going to get rich and famous and all that. You're just going to probably be pretty poor and just work really hard all your life and not gain much at all if you preach the truth. But if you preach something different, you can get a following, and so you can make money and you can become famous and have prestige, and that's a lot of people think that's worth a lot. Most error deliberately introduced to Christianity is a cynical exercise at making financial gain in some way, and we need to understand that this is so. Religion is full of con men, and people, particularly Christians, are the most naive people in the world. because we believe in telling the truth ourselves, we tend to believe that everybody else will tell the truth, when in fact it's not so. And we need to stop being naive, and we need to understand that we are being conned over and over and over again. It happens with the versions of the Bible. It happens with books and literature. It happens with music. It happens everywhere, and Christians over and over again are conned because we are naive. And then we have the problem of truth without balance, and that's what we want to look at here. The teaching of truth without balance can arise for many reasons. It's sometimes done deliberately for gain, either for financial or prestige, and it's often combined with the willful ignorance of the doctrine in question. And many authors do this for financial gain. We need to be very careful of the books that we read. Books are very subtle in that when we read them, the information goes into our brain and it stays there. And we mightn't realise it, but it's there for the rest of our lives when we read it. And so it's a subtle way of introducing an imbalance. Certainly our brain can assess what we read, and we can reject error, and our brain will do that. But when it comes to a balance, unless our brain understands that there's an imbalance, it will accept what it's being taught by the book. And so we need to be very careful of the books that we read. Authors know this, and they're very cunning and very willfully conning us. That's what they're doing, and we need to be careful about it. And then the teaching of truth without balance is sometimes done to counter an imbalance already in place, and is a genuine attempt to restore the middle ground, but it goes too far. And we call this the pendulum effect. There's an imbalance one way, we try to correct it, and in trying to correct it, it goes too far, and then there's an imbalance the other way, and it's very hard to find the middle ground again. And it's a genuine attempt to find the middle ground. And then it's sometimes the result of intensive study of a particular subject which captivates those involved to the exclusion of all else, and so becomes an imbalance without that being the intention. We don't find that so much these days because there's not that many people that are really intensively studying the doctrines. In the past, the doctrines were the very centre of all the study that the churches did, and so there would be great emphasis on the particular doctrine that a church at a particular time was studying, and so that doctrine would sort of get out of balance, so it would captivate them. And to me, those were the wonderful times when the doctrines were delved into, and we find that in the past, our brethren, Christian people, for generations would study the doctrines, one generation passing it on to the next, and at times there became an imbalance because they got so caught up in the wonder of the doctrine that they were studying that it began to exclude the other doctrines, and we need to be careful that that doesn't happen. I would rather that happen than the situation we've got now, when nobody knows the doctrines much and nobody studies them. Nobody gets too caught up in them either. And so those times are not our times, but it can happen, and it certainly has happened in the past, and it's become a problem. To me, I would love to think we could get back to that situation where that could actually happen again. And then sometimes an imbalance is inherited, and it's often that this is true, that this is so. Most of our denominations, right, are based on some doctrinal stand taken in the past, and the doctrinal balance is handed on to future generations. So there's been an issue, people have made a stand, it really did matter, and they've put in place where they're at with that doctrinal stand. And then they hand it on to future generations. Now, in its origins, back when it first happened, this balance was obviously necessary, or the movement would not have developed into a denomination. But while the truth remains the same, now let me emphasise this, the truth remains the same. The balance at first established, when they made that stand, is not necessarily appropriate at all times in history. Having made that stand, they've maybe moved a bit too far one way or the other. And it's not necessarily the best thing to be where they're standing at all times in history. Now remember, the truth behind it remains the same, and we're not saying that they should change the belief, the truth, just the emphasis that they've inherited maybe has gone too far one way. And it can happen, and it obviously has happened if we look objectively at the denominations that we have in the Western world. And then it's often the result of individuals not realising that there's a need for doctrinal balance, and so not making any attempt to personally achieve it. This often happens with teachers, people who are teaching doctrine. I know for myself, when I put a doctrine together and then I teach it, when I'm studying that particular doctrine and teaching that particular doctrine, I'm so caught up in that doctrine that if I'm not really careful, I can transmit an imbalance to those that I'm teaching. I don't even need to be out of balance myself, but I can get out of balance just so easily because the doctrines are just so wonderful, and you just get so caught up in them. And then when you come to teach them, you get so enthusiastic that you pass that on, and you can actually get an imbalance yourself, or you can pass an imbalance on, and often that can happen to teachers unless they understand that there is a need for doctrinal balance, and they look for it in themselves, and they look to try and pass it on. Now, it's all right to look for it in yourself, but it's very hard not to pass on an imbalance because the people that you're teaching, if they're listening and taking notice, will be caught up in what you're caught up in, and unless they understand that they need a balance too, they can get out of balance, and it's not even your intention for that to happen. So it can often be the result of individuals not realising there's a need for doctrinal balance, and so not making an attempt to personally achieve it.